Is that a bug? Is that just a leaf? Okay, your seed. Cool. Now, this is something that I wish I would have learned earlier on my journey of balancing my hormones that encompassed roughly around 3 years that I was trying to actively figure out how to balance my hormones naturally, how to basically take care of my cycle health, my hormonal acne at the time. And I think learning this earlier on would have been a big help in just kind of figuring out exactly how hormones worked and how I could work backwards in figuring out how to balance my hormones naturally. And honestly, it wasn't until just recently, as I'm starting to get more information on just cycle health in general, as I'm being certified as a fertility awareness educator and a cycle health educator, that I realized just how important it is to ovulate. Now, everyone talks about how you need a good amount of estrogen to progesterone to have balanced hormones and the importance of having enough progesterone because usually in our current culture we have a lot of estrogen dominance. That tends to be kind of the main type of hormonal imbalance. But the thing that no one talks about is how you get progesterone, how you get a good amount of progesterone to offset the effects of estrogen. No one's talking about it. And the key to getting enough progesterone and having healthy hormones is that we need to make sure that we are ovulating, which I know can be a little icky for some. At least it was for me, just because as someone that spent their whole entire lives, not really their whole entire lives, I mean, like ever since I've started cycling, not wanting to get pregnant, not wanting to have kids, and having this like fear around ovulation. I know it can be a little weird and has definitely has more of like a mindset shift. But ovulating is how we produce progesterone, and it is necessary for our overall health. Okay. So first, let's go into some general anatomy to kind of break this all down. Okay, so the basic rundown is during our pre-ovulatory phase, so that is our follicular phase right after our period, our follicles, maybe like a handful of them, are developing to possibly ovulate. Now, there's a couple of different hormones that stimulate our follicles to develop, mainly FSH, LH, which all you have to know is that they're hormones that are helping our follicles develop further. And then, of course, there's estrogen. Now, once estrogen gets to a certain threshold or a peak, it triggers ovulation. Now, once we have ovulated, that egg is viable for 24 to 48 hours. Roughly, it's 24-hour periods, but in cases where two eggs are out, so in cases of twins, then that pushes it out to 24 to 48 hours. Now, the follicle, or kind of like the area where the egg had been developing, that then turns into a gland called the corpus luteum. That is what produces progesterone. So without ovulation occurring or without that egg rupturing, we wouldn't be able to get the corpus luteum. Therefore, we wouldn't be producing progesterone. Now, just kind of going back a little bit into why ovulation is so important, because obviously it is important for our overall hormonal health, but also just our regular health in general. Our hormones interact with our bone health. It is how we gather our bone density, our cardiovascular health, and our breast health. There is a specific interplay between estrogen and progesterone, where estrogen is more of like the growth of tissues, while progesterone is there to mitigate and make sure that it doesn't fully get out of control. There is a specific interplay between estrogen and progesterone that impacts all of these different tissues in our body. The way I like to describe it is think of estrogen as the builder. It goes out and starts building tissue. And then progesterone comes in and it's the carpenter. It is the one that makes sure that estrogen isn't going and building too much. It is there to mitigate any excess growth that estrogen can possibly do. And that growth and mitigation impact, once again, our bone health, cardiovascular health, breast health, among other tissues in the body. Which is why, once again, ovulation is more than just for reproduction, it is for our overall health and well being. Now, something that is important to mention, especially for those that have hormonal imbalances or kind of have tendencies towards hormonal imbalances, is that just because you got your period doesn't necessarily mean that you ovulated, which is weird, I know. So let's talk about why exactly that could be the case. So in cycles where you don't ovulate, that is called an unovulatory cycle, or a cycle that you just didn't ovulate. So the endometrial lining gets influenced by estrogen, but just estrogen. But because ovulation didn't occur, then that then triggers a breakthrough bleed, or essentially a shedding of the lining where no ovulation occurred. Now, sometimes these can come up as cycles that were really long, or it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. That's why it's really good to be tracking your cycle on a daily basis just to see if you are ovulating or not. Which, if you haven't seen my video on how to track your cycle on a daily basis or the case for why you should track your cycle on a daily basis, then I recommend checking out this video over here where I kind of explain it in detail when it comes to how I use the fertility awareness method as a form of diagnostics to make sure that I am indeed ovulating. Okay, so then begs the question, how exactly do we promote ovulation now that we understand that ovulation is more than just for reproduction, it is for our overall health. And I will continue to say it into the void until it starts to get more traction and just kind of manifest itself into the ether. Now, there's a few ways that we can promote ovulation. And the first one, and probably the one I would say has the most impact, is reducing stress. Stress is what I would call our number one most common hormone disruptor that we now face with on a daily basis. And stress, or more specifically cortisol, the hormone of stress, does really negatively impact our hormonal health. And the way I like to explain this is, say that there is some type of threat. There is a famine, there's a natural disaster, there's a conflict going on. It wouldn't be smart for you to possibly get pregnant. Therefore, as your body's intelligence, it will delay or just altogether skip ovulating because that would not be smart. And that's kind of what is happening in our day-to-day basis. But instead of natural disasters, which I mean sometimes, but sometimes that is the case, but more often than not, it is just from day-to-day life stressors. Our body doesn't understand that. It just understands that you're stressed, therefore there is adrenaline, there's cortisol, therefore it wouldn't be smart to ovulate. And then there is the additional layers of cortisol where it can impact our sleep, leading to insomnia, which further negatively affects our hormones, as well as nutrient deficiencies, as cortisol strips the building blocks of some nutrients to be able to make more cortisol because we are possibly in danger. Now, the next big thing that impacts whether or not we are ovulating or not is the quality of food that we're eating, because that does go hand in hand with the nutrient deficiencies that I mentioned earlier. Making sure that we're getting a good amount of food, good quality food, that we're getting all the nutrients that we need to get those building blocks for said hormones. And then a third good way to promote ovulation is to minimize the amount of hormone disruptors that we come in contact with, because these hormones are xenohormones or xenoestrogens that mimic our own innate hormones, which can really confuse the body in figuring out if we have enough of that specific hormone. But the issue is that these hormones, these synthetic hormones, are similar to our own innate hormones, but they don't necessarily act the same. So really taking a look at our skincare products, our makeup, our cookware, anything that we come in contact with, honestly. And I would recommend the EWG database. On that, I'll have that link down below, where essentially you can look up any product that you're using, which is super helpful, making sure that we aren't coming into contact with a lot of plastics, because plastics do have a lot of xenohormones, xenoestrogens in them. And another big hormone disruptor is, unfortunately, fragrances and perfumes. There is a lot of not only xenohormones in them, but also just parabens and things that aren't the best chemical wise for our body, which can make it a little bit harder for our body to get back on track to cycling normally and ovulating. And then lastly, of course, if you need additional support, find additional support that you think will help. Either if it is acupuncture, if it is our Vigo massage, which if you don't know what that is, I did a video on my experience of my first time getting an Vigo massage. I'll also have that linked in the corner. Whether it is a functional doctor, an herbalist, look for that additional support because you are not in this alone. There is many of us that have a hormonal imbalance, and it can be a lot to figure out exactly what's going on, how these hormones work, and then trying to apply that to ourselves. So definitely get that additional support if you can and if you want. Now, if you're just starting your journey on figuring out how to balance your hormones naturally, or you just want a little bit more extra resources, then I do have a starter kit over here. I'll have that link down below as well, where it goes into detail into what nutrition to look for, what skincare to look for when it comes to avoiding hormone disruptors, and also some lessons on anatomy and physiology when it comes to our hormone health. That way you can learn more about it. That way it is a little bit easier to understand what you should be looking for when it comes to your own hormonal imbalance. So I hope you learned something new today. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I'll be seeing you next time.